Hello and welcome to the Informed Animal Ally presented by the Vancouver Humane Society. This is the Animal Ethics Podcast where we share the ins and outs of topics like cruelty, legislation, and advocacy here in BC and across Canada. Hi, I'm Chantelle Archambault, Communications Director for the Vancouver Humane Society. With me, as always, is VHS's Executive Director, Amy Morris.
Hello.
We've just wrapped up our series on animal cruelty, where we talked about the laws and regulations meant to protect different species from cruelty, as well as the gaps in those laws. So this month, we're flipping the script and beginning a new series where we'll talk about animal well-being. So what does good welfare look like for animals? The first episode will go into what a good life looks like for companion animals and answer a question that I think a lot of animal guardians care really deeply about, and that's, is my pet happy?
So yeah, we'll dive into this. We know there's more than 1 billion cats and dogs on Earth. Our society will likely always have companion animals. Certainly cats are producing prolifically in warmer places. So I just can't imagine a world without them. And I think dogs will do just fine as well. One of the things that I really like to think about is, if a vegan future is possible, what does a future look like for these companion animals? What does it mean to give them a good life in that existence? I often reflect on the ways that you can keep an animal, and are the ways that we keep animals right now the best ways? There often are these sort of compromises between their personal freedom and their physical well-being. So we want to keep them out of traffic. That protects their personal physical well-being, but it might compromise their freedom and their sense of freedom and autonomy. I'd love to dive into this more as we get into this conversation. So at a very basic sense, what does a well-being look like for companion animals? Spoke about physical health and safety. Mental well-being, obviously also a huge part of that. Having relationships with their guardian, if that's what they want, or other animals, if that's what they want. And having the ability to play and express their natural behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much to delve into with this topic, and we could speak for hours and hours about it. But today we'll look at the differences between different animals. Animals are individuals, just like humans are. We'll mostly be focusing on dogs and cats today. So we'll look at the differences between different species. We'll look at animals who are young versus animals who are older. We'll look at the difference between animals living in urban and rural environments and how all of their needs differ depending on their situation and just their individual preferences.
And really, these are opinions. Is my pet happy? That's a qualitative question, certainly measurable through different types of assessments, but I think ultimately it comes down to learning, and it comes down to learning as much as you can. So we'll share lots here today, and my recommendation is keep learning. Anything that you think, I don't know the reason behind that, explore it, find out more about it. Never assume that you know why your animal is doing what they're doing, because often we're wrong, and it's good to admit that.
Absolutely.
So let's start with spaying and neutering. This one is an interesting topic because in the humane movement, it has been a cornerstone for a really long time. And yet, more recently, it's become quite controversial. So I'll share a little bit about that. I think what's important to think about is why spaying and neutering started. Really, Humane Society's SPCAs in the 1950s were so overloaded that they were doing massive, large-scale euthanasia, and the numbers of animals wasn't really changing. There were still many animals, and there were people whose jobs it was to essentially put animals to death unnecessarily. And so spaying and neutering became a procedure that would be an alternative to that, to stop the production of animals. And it took a really long time. We're talking, that was in the 1950s when that was really prevalent. Now 70 years later, we're still working at this, and we're still trying to make sure that animals become spayed and neutered, because the second a community has a gap in this, especially when there's a warm climate, we see numbers just bloom. And that also happens in microcosms where animals are being fed, cats in particular, but in all around the globe, places where animals have access to food, they're going to have more success with essentially breeding offspring. And then you end up with more animals living in the community than there are resources to provide for their healthcare and their well-being, essentially. There's a lot of research out about spaying and neutering in general. There's a higher quality of life associated with cats and dogs who are spayed and neutered versus those who are intact. There's behavior outcomes, such as reducing mating behaviors, which can be quite conflict-oriented if you haven't been around animals that are mating. Certainly, there tends to be a lot of fights that break out, physical injuries that will happen to all of the, let's say, the males who are interested in pursuing the female that's in heat. And there's also marking. Animals will roam a lot further. They might cross rows that they wouldn't normally. Their behavior just changes markedly when essentially they're intact. It also reduces the risk of some diseases like mammary cancer, vascular disease, which affects blood vessels, and degenerative diseases. And so essentially any kind of cancers that would be the organs that end up being removed, they just remove the likelihood of that cancer happening. There are some studies that show spayed or neutered dogs are at a higher risk of some other diseases, but it's been found that the benefits far outweigh the risks. Certainly there's some bone considerations. And so thinking about what age to spay or neuter a large breed dog, it's important to be in consultation with a veterinarian about that. And spayed and neutered dogs live an average of 1.5 years longer, which who knows if that's because they're making better decisions for themselves because they're not motivated by their hormones, or if it has to do with the diseases. But I think that stat by itself really shows us the benefit.
Absolutely. I think that's really compelling. We all want the animals we share our lives with to live a long and happy and healthy life. Also, I just want to note here that oftentimes when an animal isn't spayed and neutered, it's not because their guardian doesn't want to have the procedure done, but because there were barriers preventing them from accessing that care. So we'll share a link to accessible spay-neuter programs in the blog post that goes with this episode, which can be found at vancouverhumane.ca/podcasts.
Great. Now we'll move on to another topic that tends to be widely debated, which is outdoor access. Chantelle, I don't know if you've ever been in communities that have free roaming animals, but certainly it is a different experience than kind of that city environment where animals are kept.
Oh, yes. Absolutely it is. Yeah, it is quite the sight to see a colony of cats approaching you.
Yeah. And certainly I've been in some places as well with free roaming dogs who get to make so many decisions. They're constantly deciding who they want to interact with and who they don't, where they want to get water from, where they want to get food from, which is a certain level of freedom that, we ourselves are afforded. And if we think about dogs that are kept indoors or cats that are kept indoors, what they eat, what they drink, what they drink from, what their friends are, that's all controlled. And so we might think, okay, we're doing a very good job of all of that, and they're pretty spoiled. And that might be the case. But certainly there's sort of some trade-offs that happen there. We know that dogs who are kept in isolation in some way, so that's on a leash or in a kennel, they're kind of in the worst case because they don't have access or ability to meet their own needs, and they don't have the social benefits of living kind of closely with us. So we know that they end up having stereotypic behaviors. Their activity levels are limited to maybe going in circles, and they're not able to do all the natural behaviors that they want to. Like, we know, obviously, they love sniffing. So dogs who live in a home, they get the joy and access of family life. They hopefully get to go out, go on walks, use their nose lots, just experience the world in a meaningful way. And they may or may not be going to dog parks. something to keep in mind is a lot of people bring dogs to dog parks who don't really actually enjoy dog parks, who find them stressful, who see it as sort of like they're facing threats rather than companionship. And so making sure to read, each individual dog to see how they want to experience the world. A dog on leash might be a bit more stressed out walking around a neighborhood with reactive dogs than a dog off leash, but a dog off leash that's not well trained may end up getting themselves into fights and need veterinary care. So it's always balancing these different kind of wants and needs. And some things that I tend to think about when it's about happiness is thinking about if you do need to contain an animal in some way, whether it be a leash or a harness or collar, thinking about different ways to basically keep an animal safe. Certainly it's important to think about in what ways, if the dog is exhibiting a natural behavior. So let's say they want to run up a mountain. In what ways is a leash and a harness or a leash and a collar confining them? Is it pushing on their throat, on their vocal cords? Are they choking or breathing strangely because of that? Is it more, something that's all encompassing, that's pulling on different areas? So it's more balanced. It's not hurting any part of them. Is it rubbing under their armpits? Are they getting friction from that that's uncomfortable? So really thinking through what the setting is and making sure that what they're wearing is as comfortable as possible for them, knowing that they're going to pull at the end of their leash sometimes. There are those leashes, those extendy leashes that some people use. They can be confusing for a dog on a leash because they're not sure where the end is. And so they're never making decisions to walk alongside because they think they have more distance than they do. And then when they're stopped short, it's sort of shocking for them. They're surprised or they're focused on something else because they've gotten so far away. So things like consistency can matter a lot when you are keeping a dog on leash. And then really when it comes to off-leash settings for dogs, we know we want them to have as much freedom as possible, and we want them to keep the safety and freedom of other dogs and animals. We also want to prevent them from eating things that are toxic to them. And so being mindful about where you choose to walk a dog off leash, how well trained they are, and also being mindful of what other dogs might be around or wild animals. Yeah, just thinking all of those things through to make sure that your dog gets the happiest experience they can.
There's definitely so many facets to this, even just this one small topic of this overall topic. And then when we talk about cats, this can be even touchier and more controversial. So I'll get into a little bit about indoor only cats compared to cats who have access to the outdoors. One study found that cat guardians in urban settings are more likely to keep cats indoors only, whereas guardians in suburban or rural settings were more likely to have outdoor cats. So there's some safety considerations there and other welfare considerations, and some of the considerations on what a good life looks like for cats with regard to indoor or outdoor living. Are cats who free roam outdoors are at greater risk of injury and illness. So there could be attacks from predators, there could be bites from other cats who might have transmissible diseases, and then that could lead to a longer term health issue. They could be hit by a car, they could be poisoned from eating toxic plants or poison rodents or other substances. And then there's also parasites like fleas and ticks and worms. Just a note about the urban and rural settings. Many guardians in urban settings cited car accidents as one of the reasons that they keep their cats indoor only. But another study actually found that outdoor cats were just as likely to be victims of road accidents in rural and urban areas, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. Indoor only cats also, they can get bored, so they might need additional enrichment to make sure that they're getting enough physical activity and they can express their natural behaviors like chasing and pouncing. And then individual cats will also have different wants and needs depending on, how old they are, what they're used to. So for instance, like a newly adopted kitten in an apartment building might be perfectly content having playtime with their guardian indoors, but then an adult cat who's used to being like an outdoor and barn cat in the country would be more likely to want what they've always done. And then there are also safer options for cats who like to be outside, but if you want to make sure that they're safe while doing so. So there's enclosed patios. You can take them on a walk with a harness close to home if that's something they'll tolerate. I share my home with a cat, Callie. She's an indoor cat, and she's really skittish around loud noises, but she still likes to have some outdoor time supervised in a fenced yard. And she likes the option to go back inside anytime she wants. So she'll let me know when she wants us to go out or come back in. And there's a lot of opening and closing of the door when that happens because cars will be going by and then she gets interested in going outside again. And then for cats, it's also important to consider the well-being of wildlife. Cats are predators, so they have natural hunting instincts, and that makes them a risk to birds and other small animals. And they're not a native part of Canada's ecosystem, so they're considered an invasive species, and that can be a concern as well.
Yeah, thanks for covering that, Chantelle. Something we can talk about pretty quickly is bedding for animals. I think this is pretty much common sense. Most people know that animals will sleep wherever they want to sleep. And that's going to really differ based on the age of the animals. So older animals tend to pick softer surfaces, but having a variety of surfaces available is really important. You know, you can buy commercial dog beds, blankets and towels. Dogs like to nest, high pile rugs, cold surfaces as well, like tile can be really nice. And then anything that, you know, in a cold environment, anything that's insulating, even providing straw or a hut with appropriate siding and straw and things like that. Making sure it's dry. That's the most important thing of all bedding, is always checking it on a regular basis. I would say like on a daily basis, and making sure the bedding is dry because, you know, just like us as humans, you know, they can get cold and they can be impacted by wet bedding.
I think that covers it really well. Going on my theme of just adding on with cats, the best cat bed is really suited to each individual cat and the way they like to sleep. And you can observe that when they're just lying down. So if they like to stretch out, a larger flat bed might be good. If they like to curl up in small spaces, a bed or a basket that's enclosed on the sides might be better for them. And it's great to have a variety so that they can choose where to be. Some cats like commercial cat beds or baskets, but pretty notoriously, a lot of cats will prefer the box that the bed came in over the actual bed. Some cats also like blankets or towels folded up on a surface. And there is some science about the cardboard box elements. Some studies show that cats in unfamiliar situations, like being in a shelter, feel less stressed when they have access to a cardboard box. And a lot of cats will translate that to places that they're comfortable in, like their home as well.
Absolutely. And I think we do this as well when we're in an unfamiliar environment. We look to all of our resources to go, what's available to me? Where can I be safe? Where can I be alone? And, you know, even if you're at a dinner party, you suddenly need a break, you're going to go into the kitchen where or maybe it's not the kitchen that's quiet, yeah, but maybe into another room. So certainly all of these things, they seem like common sense, but it's a reminder to relate animals to ourselves because we have the same psychological motivations. So I think that applies when it comes to water. Certainly we like access to fresh, clean water when, you know, often if water sits around for 24 hours, I might dump it out for myself and get myself a fresh glass. The same goes for animals. They often don't like the saliva of another animal. So if you have multiple animals living in a house, keeping multiple waters and changing all of them on a regular basis is important. Cleaning the bowl is really important because they can build up basically saliva and then bacteria over time. And then also when you have animals living outdoors, it's really important for the water to not be frozen. and to make sure it's kept fresh and clean as well.
Definitely. And just to add on for cats specifically, most cats prefer to have at least one water bowl that's not next to their food dish. And that's an instinctual thing with fear of contamination from their food going into their water source.
Yeah, and cats really, I think the best thing is to just have as many water sources as possible around the house.
Definitely.
And then food. Food is a really complicated one, especially as Vancouver Humane Society is a vegan organization. So we advocate for an end to all animal suffering, including for farmed animals. And that can be really complicated when it comes to feeding companion animals like cats and dogs who typically eat some meat in their diet, proportions differing. But it doesn't have to be, because there are now starting to be solutions in which all animals can thrive. And so certainly the ideal we're working towards is a future where animals are not used and killed for food, and where human animal relationships are respected and all animals have an opportunity to thrive.
Absolutely. And looking into the future, I think the simplest solution is to use lab grown or cultured meat for companion animal food. And there's one company that I know of that's already doing this with cultured meat pet treats. So that's a really interesting development. We'll link that in the blog post as well. And then we need to look at, if that's the ideal, how do we get there? So we can advocate for innovation to develop those cultured meat alternatives and make it more accessible in terms of availability and cost. We can also continue to conduct and follow the research around what nutrients animals need to thrive. Each animal guardian will need to, observe their companion animal's health and behavior, and then make the best choices that enable your companion animal to thrive. And that could mean introducing plant-based foods. There's new research being done into the healthfulness of plant-based diets for pets. And we'll also link to a Lunchtime Live from Animal Justice Academy that goes into depth on this topic. But I think there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of development into a better, brighter future for all animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chantelle.
I think the next thing we could touch on is relationships. Companion animals are social. They thrive when they have a strong relationship with their guardian a lot of the time. And as we mentioned, more than half of Canadians share their home with animals, and most consider those animals to be part of the family. I know I certainly do. And that relationship can look different for different individuals. So some dogs always want to be right beside their person. Some enjoy more alone time. In some cases, animals who were previously feral prefer lots of space, and they can take years to warm up to their caregivers. But in general, it's a good idea to build trust and let your companion have their own agency on when to engage and listen to their communication. There's also some animals who have strong relationships with other companion animals in the house, if there are any. And again, that depends on the individual. Some prefer to be a one animal household, and some are bonded with each other. And you'll see this in feral dogs and cats too. Feral dogs typically have their own routines, but they'll buddy up with each other and spend time together. Some feral cats live on their own. Some like to form colonies. So it's really an individual preference. And when you're making a decision about whether to open your home to one or more companion animals, you can look at their current and previous relationships to kind of give you an idea of how they respond to relationships with other animals.
Yeah, and this one is really interesting and complicated, because certainly we get in our heads sometimes like, oh, well, there's a lot of dogs out there that need to be rescued, and I have one, but I have space for another. And so we go, okay, I should get another dog because I have the space and capacity for it. And meanwhile, the dog that you have isn't really keen on that, isn't really keen to share their space. And the same can go for cats. And so really getting a read on, is your dog or your cat or your rabbit happy in and of themselves? Do they seem like they're longing for more social connection? I had one dog who would just cry, whenever I left the house. And I had some foster puppies, and I videoed to see what would happen when I was away. And I had basically a kennel with an X pen around it. and he jumped up onto the table to jump onto the kennel to go into the X pen to lay down with the puppies. And he was so much calmer when he was doing that. And I realized, okay, he needs to live with other animals. He's just too sad to live alone, or to be left alone.
Aw.
So really, my dog now does not want another dog in the household. She's very protective, and she wants all the treats and toys and water to be hers and hers alone. So certainly looking at the individual is important.
Definitely.
Great. Well, let's go into a little bit of biology on animal behavior. We know so much now about animal behavior grounded in science, which is incredible because for so long it was just people guessing and there was a lot of misinformation being spread. So I'm excited to share more of an informed concept of animal behavior. If the language gets sort of too technical, we'll get to a point that maybe will feel a bit more relatable. So mammals, that's us. We're mammals, dogs, cats, rabbits. We have an autonomic nervous system. This system manages involuntary physiological processes. So that's our heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, digestion, and sexual arousal. And it contains 3 distinct divisions. So there's the sympathetic autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system, and the enteric autonomic nervous system. So you may have heard of the fight or flight response. That's really well known. It's actually a really simplified explanation of one function of our sympathetic nervous system, which I'll just call our SNS for short. And so the SNS engages with nearly every living tissue in our body. So when we and our pets experience stress, it's our SNS that responds. It may respond with one of 4 reactions, the well-known fight and flight, as well as the lesser-known freeze and fawn. So with animals, you may notice fight presenting as biting or growling, barking, or baring teeth, and that's all with dogs, or swatting, hissing, or an excited but tight tail wag for cats. You might notice flight when they run away or cower behind you. Freeze can be much more subtle. Sometimes in dogs, you'll see the whites of their eyes, a stiff position, a stiff tail, or them kind of laying down and staying put. This response is really common in rabbits and chickens as well. Often people think that they're calm when actually they're just as stressed as an animal who is fighting or fleeing. They're just frozen. And fawn also presents itself, for example, in dogs when they show their bellies, wag their tails, trying to make them seem as unthreatening as possible. So that's the sympathetic nervous system. So then the parasympathetic nervous system, that's the PNS, we'll call it, is responsible for calming our stress. So it's known as the rest and digest system, specifically called the vagus nerve, which there's a lot of research around this and kind of co-regulation that I recommend diving into and kind of human understanding of stress. But this nerve has a role in providing an early warning system for us and animals as well for things like colds and flus. And it also monitors the body's recovery. So to get an idea of whether a pet is happy, it's good to understand the signs of their sympathetic nervous system being activated, as well as their parasympathetic nervous system responding. So when it comes to things like calming, we know that dogs can calm themselves by shaking, which comedically, there's an entire body of therapy for humans dedicated to that called somatic movement. And they might call it displacement behaviors as well for animals. You can see them trying to manage stress by panting, yawning, licking their lips, whining. Whining can also be considered a fawning response because the dog might be seeking connection and reassurance. They might also, I said rest and digest, so they might also go to the bathroom after a stressful situation. Peeing can be a fear response. And I often see this in spay-neuter clinics when animals wake up from a surgery that, it's the most stressful thing that they experience probably in their lifetime. And they will pee and they'll poo as the first thing they do when they wake up. Cats are notorious for their freeze response. I think in lots of cartoons, you see that puffing up and then not moving. They're also excellent at hiding if they have enough time to assess the situation and know that they have a safe getaway. They might also develop maladaptive eating and toileting behaviors if they're chronically stressed. And of course, going back to that fight mode, I think we've all seen cats that know how to engage in the fight mode and conflict as well. So sometimes signs of stress are subtle in cats. They can exist over a long period of time. So in a household with more than one pet, it's really important to have different water sources and litter boxes to prevent one animal from being able to guard all of the resources, because we know that happens sometimes. So now that we know what stress looks like, that's the is my pet happy? And the answer might be no. What other states are there that animals experience? They can be excited, which can look like stress, but typically they'll have irregular ear and tail movements that show like anticipation, so they're not frozen or in an aggressive state. And happiness, it can mean excited, it can mean calm, it can mean content. So what that looks like is going to differ. Outside of the excited state, you'll see an animal's body be very loose, eyes being soft. They might blink more slowly.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of cat guardians are familiar with cats slow blinking as a sign of affection.
Yeah. Cats might even knead with their paws or rhythmically swish their tails or rub against you. Dogs might lay on their backs or sprawled out and wag their tails. They show signs of playfulness, including seeking out toys. Dogs even have a certain kind of laughter that typically comes out when they're playing with other dogs. But if they have a good bond with you, it might be possible to hear it from them when you play with them too. And they'll be comfortable grooming themselves and eating. And cats, they might purr or chirp.
I find that a lot of the time when someone's really familiar with only dogs, they can find cats' behavior sort of confusing and vice versa. And I think that's probably because a lot of behaviors that you mentioned have opposite meanings depending on the species. So, for instance, when a dog yawns, they could be feeling fear or stress, but cats tend to yawn when they're relaxed. And then both of them wag their tails for a lot of reasons. But more commonly, it's associated with dogs being happy or excited and cats being kind of annoyed. I just find it really interesting to look at the differences between their behaviors. We'll share a resource where you can look into some general ways that cats and dogs express their feelings through their behaviors in the blog post, but I think that was a really good start to animal behavior.
Yeah, and I'd like to chat a little bit more about play. I mentioned it briefly. I absolutely love watching animals play. As you've noticed, we have mostly been talking about dogs and cats. For any species outside of dogs and cats, I really recommend researching their natural behaviors around fear and stress and play. Sometimes people think an animal is doing well when they're actually stressed or afraid. So one really important aspect of play is considering the play from the perspective of the animal. One example would be playing tug of war with a dog. I know there's a misconception out there that this game can be used to establish a hierarchy where there's one winner, always, who happens to be the guardian, and they're the one in charge. This isn't play. Power can be a factor in play, but dogs prefer to set the rules. And if they're not setting the rules, they don't really see it as play. They're just, doing what they have to get the response from you that they need. But typically, if they're playing, they're the ones that are in charge. And so if you give a dog space to do so, and you give them resources, and you give them your time and engagement, they'll start to create games and teach you how to play them the way that they want. Whether it's hide and go seek, fetch, tug of war, scent games, learning tricks, or agility, it's really important that a dog is positively reinforced and always given options so that they can communicate whether they want to opt into the activity. And if you choose to engage in physical play with the dog, really take it slow and observe what they respond well to. So, for example, my dog Clover, she doesn't like anything that goes over her head, whether someone's trying to pet her head or a harness, and certainly not in play as well. She also doesn't like being jumped on. She doesn't like dogs getting really in her face or right on her back. But she loves when you kind of tug at her paws and do like gentle, light tugging. She loves when you kind of like paw at her face with your hands, paw at her neck. She actually loves to be like trustful. Like she loves for me to take her weight and put her on the ground and then tug at her paws. And I do it very carefully. But I just noticed that over time, observing her with other animals and then building that trust with her. And I can tell when I get a play behavior right, because when I move backwards, she'll actually come towards me. So she'll say, hey, this is fun. I want to keep doing this. And that's an example of giving choice. And something that comes up frequently with play and dogs is mouthing. It's really important to recognize that bite inhibition is best taught to puppies because they'll learn it easily that way. If a dog wasn't taught bite inhibition as a puppy, it's really important to follow a very specific training protocol using positive reinforcement to prevent accidental injury during play and to make sure everyone is happy about the outcome.
I love talking about animal play as well. It's one of my favorite topics, actually. Most cats like to play both just by themselves and with another cat or person. So, in other words, solitary and social play. And generally, the way they play reflects their natural hunting behaviors, like stalking, chasing, pouncing. Solitary play usually involves a cat interacting with their environment or toys, like batting around a toy mouse or jumping in paper bags. And again, animals are just as unique as humans are. So different cats will have different toy preferences. For instance, Callie's really indifferent to toy mice, but she loves batting around like a big pom-pom and pouncing under rugs and playing with her ball track toy that has kind of an enclosed ball that she can bat in a circle. You can also play with your cat with their toys as a form of social play, like moving around to one toy for them to chase or, throwing a small toy. And again, every cat has a different style of play when they're playing socially. So some cats love to chase toys that are thrown, and some will even bring them back. Some like jumping up at a wand toy when you dangle it above their head, like they would if they were doing their natural behaviors, chasing a bird. And some like to kind of pounce on it on the ground like they would with a mouse. And then even how you move the toy can make a big difference in whether they're interested or not. One way that cats play with each other is by fighting or chasing. And some cats also like to do this with people, but it's important to really read your individual animal companion's behaviors and also to teach your cat not to bite you, which you can do when they're young, especially by putting a large object like a stuffed animal between you and them when they start to bite. But yeah, that being said, some cats can have a lot of fun with games like hide and seek and tag. And cats will also let you know which toys and games are their favorite because they'll play with those more and they'll either initiate the play themselves or they'll be receptive when you start playing. Going back to behavior, a playful cat will typically have dilated eyes and will focus on the thing that they're playing with, and their tail might also be up, which is typically a sign of, friendliness, or their tail could be twitching to show they're excited. If they're growling or hissing or flattening their ears, that's a sign that they're really no longer feeling playful and have actually become frustrated. So that would be a sign to wrap it up. Also to note, cat toys don't have to be expensive. Most cats actually love playing with found items that are typically around the home, as long as it's a safe item, not a choking hazard. It can be something that they consider a toy. A choking hazard includes things like items that have parts that can break off or a material that can be broken off, and either a part of it or the whole can fit the whole thing into their mouth and be swallowed. But some favorites in our house are the rope strings that come out of hoodie hoods, hair scrunchies, boxes with a hole cut out, rugs, rolled up socks, paper bags. It's really, the world is open for cat toys. And then sometimes cats also get zoomies where they run around, maybe pounce on things or run in and out of hiding places. And sometimes they meow really loudly, which can be alarming, but is typically a normal cat behavior. Cat zoomies are called frenetic random activity periods, FRAPs. Yeah, they're usually a normal way for cats to burn off excess energy or express excitement. And if you get woken up at 3 a.m., you might be familiar with this. If a cat is doing this a lot, it could mean that they need more enrichment throughout the day to get the exercise they need and engage their mind. And if their running behavior is unusual or seems distressing to them, you can check in with your veterinarian to find out if it could be due to an underlying health issue. But typically it's a very normal cat behavior that they'll do every once in a while.
Yeah, thanks for covering that. Certainly I've learned throughout life of how to play, how to read behavior of these major species. Still don't know lots about some species that I've spent less time with. For me, it always comes back to I know less than I thought is the common theme. I had a dog where I hired a trainer, and the trainer gave me some suggestions on what to do about the dog barking when I left the house and barking in the house. And I just thought, okay, well, I paid this person. They must know what they're talking about. And in the end, the recommendations were not effective and just broke the bond that I had with the dog. And so this is a huge topic when, the sort of mashup between behavior and training. And we've left that off here intentionally. So that can include the tools used to manage an animal, like harnesses, collars, leashes, also things people use negatively, like spray bottles or shake cans or citronella, and shock collars and prong collars. And it also includes the methods used to train animals, which we know from Psychology 101 operant conditioning. There's 4 quadrants, and we can get into that. So since this is such a big topic, we're going to do a separate episode on it. The way an animal is trained is going to make a huge impact on their experience of the world and their level of happiness. So next month, we'll dive into detail about animal training, which is a very controversial topic, but I'm excited about it because it's something I'm personally passionate about. And I think it will lead, the more knowledge that's out there will lead to happier animals.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for that discussion as well. And I hope you, the listener, will join us for that. This is just such a broad topic. We could go on for hours. I hope you found this overview helpful for the first episode of this new series. And if there's something you feel we've missed, we invite you to leave a comment and let us know what other topics you're interested to hear about when it comes to animal behavior and happiness and living a good life. We'll share this episode on the Vancouver Humane Society's social media where you can get in touch with us. So thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next month.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Hope that you can take a look at your pet and ask, are you happy? And have some resources or at least some more questions. Take care and bye, everyone.
The Informed Animal Ally is a podcast by the Vancouver Humane Society. If you found this episode helpful, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more supporters of animals. To support this project and other initiatives to build a kinder world for animals, you can make a donation at vancouverhumane.ca. You can also follow the Vancouver Humane Society on Facebook at Vancouver Humane Society, Instagram at Vancouver Humane, or Twitter at VanHumane. The music in this episode is the song Jonah's Message for New York by Dr. Turtle, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International Public License. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being an animal ally.